Students, we were having an overview of the cultural school of thought, and then we had an overview of the premises of the school. Now we will see some different literature and different aspects of this cultural school to explain the premises and to see that how these premises are actually embedded in the cultural school and what they are saying. So let's have an overview of the cultural school of thought and different factors in it. The strategy and culture linkage, the linkage between the concept of the culture and strategy are many and varied. This is the important point which we are going to discuss here, that the linkage between the concept and of culture and strategy are different and they are discussed from different angles. So as we were discussing in previous videos, what is culture, what is the definition of culture, and we were having an overall view of the culture which can be differentiated on the basis of a nation, on the basis of a country or industry or an organization, or even on the departmental level. But here our focus will be basically on the organization and the strategy making process, which we have not discussed in the previous video. So we will see that what is the linkage between the concept of the culture and strategy and how literature has approached it from different aspects. These are the 5 points which we are going to discuss here in this video. One is the decision-making style, resistance to strategic change, overcoming resistance to change, dominant values, and the culture clash. So we will see one by one these points. Number 1 point is the decision-making style. This is the culture study that has made it possible for us to see that there are different kind of culture in the organization or in the industry even. And this is the cognitive school of thought which has told us that there are different kind of mental processes and the social interaction which gives us different viewpoints. So we had some objectivist wing and subjectivist wing in which we saw that reality can be different for every person. So in the decision-making style, when we see the culture, we see culture and the cognitive school of thought, we can say that as culture is highly dependent upon the social interaction of individuals, and individuals have those mental processes and the cognitive processes of decision making or even taking certain thing into account. So that is different for every person. So reality can be different for every person. So is the case with the organization. Every organization perceives the environment on the basis of the perspective they are having inside the organization. That is called the culture, which we discussed in the previous video, that the perspective can be different for every organization, and that perspectives highly depend upon the individuals and their social interaction and their mental schemas they have. So the perspective is developed inside the organization, and that perspective is the lens for an organization to see and evaluate the external environmental factors. So the decision-making style and the strategy-making style can be different for every organization on the basis of the culture they have, on the basis of the human resource they have, on the basis of the cognitive processes an individual has in his mind, and how they interact with each other and develop the certain kind of knowledge and set of belief. This was the list. Now let's have the second point, overview of the second point. Second point is the resistance to strategic change. The culture and strategy relationship also tells us that how the resistance to strategic change can be present in an organization. This is usually a common practice that when an individual interacts with another individual and try to come up with a new set of knowledge and belief, that knowledge and belief is so embedded in the organization that becomes the perspective of the organization, that sometimes it becomes so deep culture in the organization that it is very difficult for us to change it. So when an organization or the CEO, for example, or the manager of the organization tries to change some strategy, the resistance can be seen. For example, in the organization, if a manager tries to on the basis of the evaluation of external environment, tries to develop a new strategy, that he will be facing resistance in the organization and from the organizational employees if the perspective or if the culture is very deep of the organization. So this is also a study which tells us that there is a strong relationship between culture and the resistance to strategic change. So if an organization tries to develop a new strategy and the culture is very deep or the culture is very strong, then the probability is that organization will face high resistance from the individuals. This is a subject which you will study in upcoming semesters. It tells us that what is the resistance to change and how the organizations try to manage that change. That this subject is about change management. This subject is out of the scope of my lecture, but I have to give you some overview on this lecture in this resistance to change. So this was all about the culture and strategy and the resistance to change. Now we will see that how the organizations overcome the resistance to change. This is also from the subject of change management, but you have to see that there are certain strategies that are present in organizations when they face resistance to change. How do they overcome the resistance to strategic change? There are usually three ways. There are usually multiple ways, but there are three steps that are usually followed. One is to unfreeze the situation. By unfreezing the situation, we mean that usually the CEO or the strategy maker in the organization, when they face the resistance inside the organizational culture, they try to develop certain uncomfortable situation in the organization for the employees, so that they can learn that this current strategy is not applicable or the strategy has to be changed. So they try to unfreeze the situation. They try to unfreeze all of their perspective they are holding right now. Then the second step is to bring the strategic change in the organization, and this is a very long procedure where the CEO or the managers or the strategy makers have to not only change all of the perspective, which is in the form of the belief sets and knowledge in the organization, but they also have to come up with a new strategy, and they have to overall change all of the strategy. Then third stage is the refreezing stage. The refreezing stage is to refreeze that perspective of the employees and to tell them that now this is the new strategy and you have to cope with this strategy. So these are the usual steps which are followed for the resistance to strategic change, to manage the resistance to strategic change. And this is also very important subject to see in the perspective of the culture of an organization and in connection to the strategy. Now the the fourth thing is the dominant values. On the basis of the social interaction, and as I told you that there are sometimes very deep and strong cultures in the organization, these deep and strong cultures come up with some dominant values, and that becomes the perspective of the organization. And organization is usually bound to act on that certain pathway, and organization is unable to change that pathway. That becomes, and there are some dominant values that are not only visible from inside the organization but from outside the organization. So how they have to change those dominant values, or how they have to cope with these dominant values, this is also the subject of the strategy and culture, and that is all about the culture of the organization. Culture clash comes when an organization acquire another organization, or two organizations merge with each other. So as we described this thing in previous videos, that culture can be different for one organization, and it can be different for another organization. It can be different for country or for a nation. So it is totally different for one entity as compared to another entity. So when an organization acquires, or another organization tries to merge with another organization, so this culture clash can be a very important thing which needs to be considered. This picture elaborates the culture clash thing. This is about the merger of two organizations. We can consider the merger of two organizations, where organizations are maybe having different kind of culture, and when they try to merge with each other on the basis of the synergy they can create, their cultures can clash with each other, and as they will be having a different kind of culture, so it will be very difficult for organizations, for both of these organizations, to cope with the culture clash and to come up with different new kind of culture, new kind of perspective. So this is a new domain of studies which we need to consider for the strategy making process, and to consider it what are the culture aspects that can be considered here. But I have told you here in this video that there are multiple aspects and there are multiple kind of relationships with culture and strategy which we need to see, which we need to study from different angles and from different perspectives. We had a different overview of multiple subjects that can check what are the cultural aspects, what are the factors that can impact the strategy formulation in the culture, taking into consideration the culture aspect. So this video, in concluding remarks, I must tell you that we already saw that what is the culture in the context of the nations and the countries, and what are the general definition of culture available. Then we had an overview of the premises of the culture school of thought, and now in this video we had an overview of the different perspectives which can give us an insight that how the culture can play its role in the strategy formulation process, and sometimes it can become problematic for organizations. So we have to study them in that perspective as well.